And speaking of that, here's a story. A true one. Margaret Sangster, a social worker, tells a story about a young boy in an urban ghetto who had been struck by a car and had not received proper medical attention when that happened, and his legs were twisted and lame. She found out about him and was helping him out in some ways, and even though it was outside of her professional responsibility, outside of the realm of that, social worker Sangster took the boy to an orthopedic surgeon in order to get him some treatment. That surgeon performed surgery on his legs, and 2 years later, the boy who had been so badly injured walked into her office for the first time without crutches. His recovery was complete. The two of them embraced one another. It was a great celebration. And she thought to herself at that time, if I accomplish nothing else in my life, I have made a difference with at least this one person. You had that experience ever in your life where you thought, if nothing else, if I don't do anything else good, at least this one time, I've done something good. I've actually done what God wanted me to do at least this one time. That's how she felt. And she paused that day that she was telling the story about this, and she asked the folks. Well, she said this was several years ago, she told them. And then she asked them, what do you think happened to that boy that I was telling you about? So her listeners, kind of going along with the enthusiasm of the moment, suggested, well, maybe he's a doctor, maybe even orthopedic surgeon like the one who helped him, or maybe a social worker like Margaret Sangster who had helped him so much, maybe a teacher, and they guessed all different kinds of things. And with tears of emotion, Margaret Sangster responded, none of that. Actually, he's in the penitentiary for one of the foulest crimes that a human can commit. She said, I was instrumental in teaching him how to walk, but there was no one to teach him where to walk. Now, I know this is that I usually tell. I tell a lot of stories. This is not one of my usual stories. It doesn't have a punchline and it doesn't have a happy ending, does it? Those are tougher stories. But those are true life stories also. And this one does have a lesson, I believe. You can have ability. You can have people in your corner encouraging you. You can have lots of advantages, like the skill of an orthopedic surgeon. But if you don't have the wisdom to go along with those things, all of the advantages that could come to you might not be enough. In the case of this young boy, he had been given a very precious gift after something terrible had happened to him. Somebody believed in him. This social worker said, I'm going to go out of my way for you. She believed in him. She felt badly about what had happened to him. She went out on a limb to make things better for him. But it all went wrong in time. He had learned how to walk, but not where to walk. He had ability, but he didn't have wisdom. Wisdom is James's subject today in this portion of the letter that we read earlier today. And wisdom, I always look things up in the dictionary, and the dictionary says that wisdom is defined as the ability to discern or judge what is true, right, or lasting. The ability to discern or judge what is true, right, or lasting. Insight. Notice it doesn't say anything about having the most knowledge, the most facts. It's the ability to be able to figure things out. Many of us think of wisdom as a solitary thing, don't we? We think of wise people as being kind of solitary people. We might picture a very wise person withdrawing from the world, going somewhere to think lofty thoughts, all alone in a neat place. The definition doesn't support it, though, does it? The definition doesn't support that. Discerning what is true or right or lasting always happens in a context. It's not off someplace alone. It's in a particular context. Insight is what one person has and others don't when the one person has a real grasp of what's happening in a situation at a given time. And even when wise people do withdraw for some quiet time, people seek them out, don't they? It's hard for them to find that time. People go and seek them out. And they don't go seeking to have them just utter some random wise thought. Nobody cares about a random wise thought. What they want to know is, what do I do next in my life? My context with the things that are difficult and challenging for me. How do I go forward in the right way? Give me your insight to go forward in my life. in context. Certain books of the Bible are called wisdom literature. James is not technically one of those books of the Bible, but many say that it comes close to being just that because of what's presented there. Now, this is a Bible trivia question. Anybody know what the most well-known biblical book of wisdom is? Anybody want to guess? Anybody ever read the Proverbs? That's the best known book of biblical, most people know some of the Proverbs. Even if they don't really know that they know the Proverbs, they know the Proverbs. A lot of people do. And the book of Proverbs is very practical, isn't it? It's about context. It's about real life. It's wisdom, but it's about real life. It puts wisdom in context. Dealing with things like relationships between parents and kids, how practical can you get? Dealing with things like fair business practices, or getting enough sleep, or maintaining a good reputation, things like that. That's what's in the book of Proverbs. Wisdom is of limited value to the person who possesses it. It means that he or she can sit around thinking wise thoughts and reaping the rewards of making good choices, and that's nice for that person. But wisdom's greatest value is not to the individual, its greatest value is to the community. Who can help guide us? Who is in touch with God? Who understands the context? Wisdom works. And I use that in two ways, that expression. Wisdom works as in work with a verb. Wisdom is active. It gets involved for the good of others. Not just thinking lofty thoughts all alone somewhere, involved in helping others. Wisdom also works in that wisdom, or actions born of wisdom, are effective. They make things happen. Things change for the good. Actions born of wisdom accomplish good in the world. They accomplish God's good purposes in the world. Now, the description that James gives of godly wisdom is lovely. Listen for his turn of phrase. It's quite nice. It says, "The wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy." Isn't that lovely? Does that describe anyone you know? Now there's a question. Does that describe anyone you know? If so, you are blessed by the presence of a wise person in your life. A couple of things that stand out for me in that laundry list of wonderful characteristics, but one of them is the phrase willing to yield. I think about that. Why would a wise person yield? That person should stand on their own. They're probably right. So why yield if you're the one who is right? A wise person knows that sometimes there's something better than being right. A few years back, I asked a man named John to share a bit of wisdom on the occasion of his 47th wedding anniversary. He said, "What's your secret of your success? You've been married for a long time." And his reflection on the secret of a long and wonderful marriage was this: "I'd rather be happy than right." A wise man, would you say, John? John's not the only one to express such a thought. The much beloved and revered Rabbi Abraham Heschel said this. He said, "When I was young, I admired clever people, but now that I am old, I admire kind people." Is there some wisdom there? I used to admire clever people, but now I admire kind people. It's probably tougher to be kind than clever, isn't it? Some things are more important than being right, even when you are right. Wise people know this, and they are willing to yield, as James says. It also says that wisdom is full of mercy and good fruits. In other words, wisdom isn't just thinking lofty thoughts, it's also beneficial actions for the good of others. So let me make up for the first story I told this morning, which I know is a little bit of a downer, unfortunately a true story, and tell you two others that illustrate the point, also true. A woman named Terry Thomas, who happens to be a Presbyterian pastor, tells a story, a personal story about kindness. Terry's grandmother, at age 95, was slowly slipping away mentally with Alzheimer's. Each time Terry went to visit her in the nursing home where she lived, her grandmother seemed to remember less and less. Finally, she gave no sign at all of being able to recognize Terry when she went to visit. But Terry kept going to visit, and she kept trying to make contact with her grandmother. She tells of one particular day, and these are her words exactly. She says, as we were talking about the insignificant stuff you talk about with people you don't really know, I laid my hand on her back. She immediately leaned forward, and as I started rubbing her back, she began smiling and purring. When it was time to go, she asked me to come again soon. The next day, when I arrived at her door, she looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Grandma," I said. "Do you remember me today?" "Of course I do," she replied indignantly. "You are the girl who rubs my back." Terry did not try to correct her. She didn't try to explain. She just rubbed her grandmother's back. Wisdom does not require applause, does not require recognition. Deeds of mercy. Another story, Mohandas Gandhi, often called Mahatma, was a great independence movement leader in India. Born in 1869, he died in 1948 at an assassin's hand. Many of you know his story. He had led the way to a new reality in India. His focus was on nonviolent resistance, and many around the world, including the USA's own Martin Luther King Jr., recognized him as a leader both political and spiritual. Gandhi often traveled by train as he went from place to place. And one particular day, he and his companion were running to catch a train that they were just a bit late for. As they pulled themselves up onto the slowly moving train car, one of Gandhi's sandals fell off and landed beside the track, the train that he was on. Gandhi and his friends stood there for a moment on the train steps, watching the sandal kind of slowly get farther away from them. Then Gandhi did a strange thing, or a curious thing, at least according to his companion. He reached down and he took off his other sandal and threw it as hard as he could back up the track so that it got to the spot where the first sandal had landed. The friend was puzzled at what he thought was a bit strange behavior, and he asked Gandhi why he did it. And Gandhi said this, "One sandal is no good to me, but if I cast it down beside the other one, perhaps a poor person will come along, discover both, and be happy that he now has shoes." Kindness was a large part of Gandhi's nature. Most of us would have been worried about our loss, wouldn't we? Oh dear, I don't have a pair of sandals anymore. That's how most of us would have thought. But his mind leaped ahead to the happy smile of a poor person who would find not just one sandal, but a whole pair to be able to wear. Wisdom. James goes on to examine conflict, both internal and external, with reference to wisdom. Wisdom, James says, is peaceable. And then he says, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. Conflicts arise in the world, don't they? Both interpersonal and international. Because we want something we do not have, and we will do anything at all in order to get it. James says that we don't have because we don't ask. I think he means because we don't ask God to give us what we need. I think if he went on, that's what he would say. You don't have because you don't ask God to give you what God knows that you need, which might not be the same and probably isn't the same as what we want, right? Want and need are not always the same thing. We get confused frequently. And then James goes on and says, you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly. And then he fills that out a bit and says, in order to spend what you get on your own pleasures.